The 12th of March, 1961, 2:17 p.m. Eternal Peace Funeral Home, Queens, New York. Vincent Rao was lying in what he thought was a coffin showroom when he realized the silk-lined casket beneath him wasn't a display model, it was his final resting place. The funeral director had been explaining burial options when Vincent suddenly felt a sharp pain in his neck, followed by paralysis that spread through his entire body within seconds. As his vision blurred and his ability to speak disappeared, Vincent could still hear and understand everything around him, including the funeral director's chilling words. "Mr. Luciano sends his regards, Vincent. Your funeral is scheduled for tomorrow, and you'll be the guest of honor." Vincent Rao wasn't dying. He was being prepared for burial while fully conscious, the victim of the most horrifying assassination method ever devised. Lucky Luciano had weaponized death itself, creating a funeral home that didn't just bury the dead, it created them. To understand how Lucky Luciano transformed the funeral industry into a sophisticated elimination operation, you need to understand the unique advantages that funeral homes offered for criminal activities in early 1960s America. Funeral homes were among the most trusted institutions in society, places where grief-stricken families entrusted their most precious memories, and where law enforcement rarely conducted investigations, because death was considered a natural conclusion to life, rather than a criminal act. More importantly, funeral homes provided perfect cover for criminal operations, because they routinely handled human remains, operated crematoriums that could dispose of evidence completely, and maintained extensive chemical supplies that could be used for purposes far beyond traditional embalming. The funeral industry's reputation for discretion and compassion made it virtually immune from the kind of scrutiny that other businesses faced from regulatory authorities and law enforcement agencies. Lucky realized that a funeral home operation could provide the ultimate camouflage for elimination activities, because dead bodies in a funeral home attracted no attention whatsoever, and because the funeral process itself could be used to dispose of murder victims in ways that would never be detected by conventional investigation methods. The inspiration for Lucky's funeral home assassination strategy came from his observation of how funeral directors possessed detailed knowledge of human anatomy, access to chemicals and equipment that could induce death or paralysis, and most importantly, the legal authority to handle human remains without oversight from medical authorities or law enforcement agencies. Lucky had been studying the American funeral industry from his Italian exile since 1959, recognizing that funeral homes offered unprecedented opportunities for eliminating enemies through methods that would be completely invisible to law enforcement, because the victims would literally disappear into the legitimate death care system without leaving any trace of criminal activity. The establishment of Eternal Peace Funeral Home required 18 months of preparation and over $2 million in initial investment that was provided through Lucky's international criminal network and laundered through religious and charitable organizations that made the funeral home appear to be a legitimate community service business. The funeral home operation was structured through a complex network of shell companies, religious foundations, and community service organizations that provided perfect cover for Lucky's involvement while maintaining his official exile status and avoiding direct violation of his deportation restrictions. Meyer Lansky coordinated the American aspects of the funeral home operation, working through established connections in New York's funeral industry to obtain the necessary licenses, regulatory approvals, and professional certifications required for legitimate funeral services. Frank Costello managed the recruitment and training of funeral home staff, ensuring that key personnel could conduct elimination operations while maintaining the appearance of providing compassionate funeral services to legitimate customers who were unaware of the facility's criminal purposes. The funeral home facility was designed to accommodate both legitimate funeral services for for unsuspecting customers and sophisticated elimination operations for targeted victims, with specialized equipment and procedures that could transition seamlessly between legal funeral preparation and criminal assassination activities. Eternal Peace Funeral Home featured all the standard funeral home services, viewing rooms, chapel services, crematorium facilities, and cemetery coordination. But the facility also incorporated hidden areas and specialized equipment that could be used for elimination operations without detection by customers, regulatory authorities, or law enforcement agencies. The embalming room was equipped with additional chemical storage areas that contained paralytic agents, sedatives, and other substances that could be used to incapacitate victims while maintaining their consciousness and awareness during elimination procedures. The crematorium was modified to operate at higher temperatures and with extended burn times that would ensure complete destruction of human remains and any physical evidence that might indicate criminal activity rather than natural death. Most importantly, the funeral home's record-keeping system was designed to create legitimate documentation for elimination operations that would satisfy any potential investigation, while concealing the true circumstances of how victims had arrived at the facility. The recruitment of qualified funeral home staff required careful selection of individuals who possessed the necessary professional skills while being vulnerable to recruitment for criminal activities through financial incentives, legal problems, or personal circumstances that made them dependent on Lucky's organization. Dr. Harold Morrison was recruited as the funeral home's director and chief embalmer. Morrison was a 52-year-old funeral director with 20 years of experience in the industry, but he was also struggling with gambling debts and professional misconduct allegations that threatened to destroy his career and financial stability. Morrison's recruitment was accomplished through Lucky's associates, who approached him with an offer to resolve his gambling debts and provide him with a lucrative position at a new funeral home that would cater to New York's Italian American community and provide high-quality funeral services with particular attention to traditional customs and family needs. Morrison was initially unaware that Eternal Peace Funeral Home would be used for criminal purposes, but his financial desperation and professional vulnerabilities made him increasingly receptive to requests for services that went beyond normal funeral home activities. The transition from legitimate funeral services to elimination operations was gradual, beginning with requests for Morrison to provide information about funeral home procedures, cremation processes, and the legal requirements for death certificates and burial permits. As Morrison became more comfortable with providing information, the requests became more specific and more obviously connected to criminal planning. Morrison was asked to explain how bodies could be prepared to conceal evidence of violence, how cremation could be used to eliminate physical evidence, and how death documentation could be manipulated to avoid investigation. The recruitment of additional staff followed similar patterns, with each employee being selected for specific skills while remaining unaware of the full scope of the funeral home's criminal activities, until they were too deeply involved to withdraw from the operation. Maria Benedetto was recruited as the funeral home's customer service coordinator. Benedetto was responsible for scheduling appointments, coordinating with families, and managing the public face of the funeral home. But she was also trained to identify potential victims and lure them to the facility through carefully crafted deception operations. Joseph Torino was recruited as the funeral home's transportation coordinator. Torino managed the facility's fleet of hearses and transport vehicles, but he was also responsible for the abduction and delivery of elimination targets to the funeral home without attracting attention from law enforcement or potential witnesses. The elimination operations began in earnest in January 1961, with Vincent Rao selected as the first major target for the funeral home assassination program. Rao was a powerful Brooklyn crime boss who had been building alliances with other families that threatened to challenge Lucky's influence over American organized crime from his Italian exile. Rao was intelligent, well protected, and suspicious of anything that might connect back to Lucky's organization, making traditional assassination methods extremely difficult to execute successfully. However, Rao's mother had recently died, and his family was dealing with funeral arrangements that provided the perfect opportunity to lure him to Eternal Peace Funeral Home. The operation against Vincent Rao was initiated through Maria Benedetto, who contacted Rao's family claiming to represent a funeral home that specialized in traditional Italian funeral services and wanted to offer condolences and assistance during their time of grief. Benedetto explained that Eternal Peace Funeral Home had heard about the family's loss through community networks and wanted to provide a second opinion about funeral arrangements to ensure that Mrs. Rao would receive the respectful farewell that she deserved according to traditional Italian customs. The approach was perfectly calibrated to appeal to Rao's family pride and his desire to honor his mother's memory through proper funeral observances that reflected their cultural heritage and social standing within the Italian-American community. Vincent Rao agreed to visit Eternal Peace Funeral Home on the 12th of March, 1961, to discuss funeral arrangements and examine the facility's services, bringing with him his brother Anthony and his longtime associate Frank Scalise as a security precaution. The appointment was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon when the funeral home would be closed to other customers, providing complete privacy for discussions about funeral arrangements, while also creating perfect conditions for elimination operations. Rao and his associates arrived at Eternal Peace Funeral Home at exactly 2 p.m., where they were greeted by Dr. Morrison and Maria Benedetto, who provided a tour of the facility and detailed explanations of available funeral services. The facility tour was designed to separate the three visitors, while appearing to provide comprehensive information about funeral home capabilities. Vincent was taken to the casket showroom, Anthony was shown the chapel and viewing rooms, and Frank was taken to discuss transportation and cemetery coordination. The separation was accomplished naturally through the funeral home's layout and the staff's professional approach to explaining different aspects of funeral services, making it appear that each visitor was receiving personalized attention rather than being isolated for elimination purposes. Vincent Rao's elimination was conducted in the casket showroom, where Dr. Morrison was explaining burial options while Vincent examined different casket styles and discussing pricing for various service levels. During the casket examination, Morrison administered a paralytic agent through a concealed injector that was disguised as part of the casket hardware demonstration. The agent was designed to cause immediate paralysis while maintaining consciousness and awareness, allowing the victim to understand what was happening while being unable to resist or call for help. The paralytic agent took effect within 30 seconds, causing Vincent to collapse onto the casket while remaining fully conscious and aware of his surroundings. Morrison immediately moved Vincent into the casket and began explaining the elimination procedure, while Vincent remained paralyzed but able to hear and understand everything. "Mr. Rao, I want you to understand that this is nothing personal," Morrison explained while securing Vincent in the casket. "Mr. Luciano has determined that your continued existence is incompatible with his business interests, and he has selected a method of elimination that will ensure your disappearance while maintaining complete operational security." Morrison continued his explanation while preparing Vincent for burial, describing how the paralytic agent would wear off gradually over the next 4 hours, but that oxygen deprivation would cause death within 30 minutes once the casket was sealed. "Your funeral is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, Mr. Rao. Your family will believe that you died of a heart attack that occurred while visiting our facility to arrange your mother's funeral, The irony is quite poetic, don't you think? Vincent's elimination was completed by sealing him in the casket and transporting him to a pre-prepared gravesite where he was buried alive while still conscious, but unable to move or call for help. The elimination of Anthony Rao and Frank Scalise followed similar procedures, with each man being isolated, paralyzed, and prepared for burial, while believing they were participating in legitimate discussions about funeral arrangements. Anthony was eliminated in the chapel during what appeared to be a discussion about memorial services, while Frank was eliminated in the transportation area during a conversation about hearse services and cemetery coordination. All three eliminations were completed within 90 minutes, with the bodies prepared and transported to burial sites before the paralytic agents could wear off and the victims could regain consciousness. The cover story for the eliminations was carefully prepared in advance, with Dr. Morrison calling emergency services to report that Vincent Rao had suffered a fatal heart attack while visiting the funeral home, and that his brother and associate had also collapsed from shock and medical emergencies related to the stress of the family loss. The emergency response found 3 bodies that showed no signs of violence or suspicious circumstances, leading medical authorities to conclude that the deaths were caused by natural medical emergencies triggered by emotional stress and family tragedy. Death certificates were issued listing heart attack and medical shock as causes of death, with no autopsy performed, because the deaths occurred in a funeral home where medical emergencies were considered unfortunate but not unusual occurrences. The success of the Vincent Rao elimination operation led to the expansion of Lucky's funeral home assassination strategy to target additional crime figures throughout New York who posed threats to his organization or could provide valuable assets if their criminal operations could be acquired through succession or forced transfer. Over the next 18 months, Eternal Peace Funeral Home systematically eliminated 23 major crime figures through burial operations that appeared to be natural deaths occurring in appropriate circumstances that attracted no suspicion from law enforcement or medical authorities. Thomas Eberle was eliminated in April 1961 during what appeared to be a visit to arrange funeral services for an associate who had recently died, but was actually a carefully orchestrated operation that resulted in his live burial after paralysis and preparation procedures. Joseph Colombo was eliminated in June 1961 during a consultation about funeral arrangements for his aging father, with his elimination appearing to be a heart attack triggered by emotional stress related to family health concerns. Albert Anastasia's brother, Salvatore, was eliminated in August 1961 during what appeared to be a visit to discuss cemetery plot purchases, with his death attributed to medical complications related to existing health problems that were aggravated by the stress of funeral planning. Frank Scalise's brother, Joseph, was eliminated in October 1961 during a discussion about memorial services for family members who had died in recent building collapses, with his elimination appearing to be related to grief and depression over recent family losses. By December 1962, Lucky Luciano had used funeral home operations to eliminate 28 major crime figures while maintaining a legitimate funeral business that generated substantial revenue and provided perfect cover for systematic elimination operations that appeared to be natural deaths. The funeral home operations had also provided Lucky with detailed intelligence about the personal lives, family relationships, and business activities of virtually every major crime figure in New York, because funeral planning discussions naturally revealed information about family structures, financial resources, and future plans that could be used for additional criminal operations. More importantly, the funeral home strategy had created a climate of psychological terror among surviving crime figures who realized that death itself had become Lucky's weapon. and that traditional security measures provided no protection against elimination methods that were conducted by trusted community institutions. The psychological impact of the funeral home operations was particularly devastating because they exploited the most fundamental human vulnerabilities related to grief, family obligations, and respect for the dead, making it impossible for potential victims to avoid exposure without appearing to dishonor their deceased family members. Federal law enforcement agencies investigated the unusual number of deaths among organized crime figures, but found no evidence of criminal conspiracy or foul play, noting that the deaths appeared to be natural medical emergencies that occurred in appropriate circumstances, where such emergencies might be expected. The FBI's investigation concluded that the deaths were coincidental results of age-related health problems, stress from criminal lifestyle choices, and natural mortality rates among individuals involved in high-risk activities, rather than evidence of systematic elimination operations. New York Police Department investigations focused on traditional criminal violence and found no evidence of shootings, stabbings, or other conventional homicide methods, leading investigators to conclude that organized crime violence was actually decreasing rather than being conducted through more sophisticated methods. Medical authorities reviewed the death certificates and found no evidence of poisoning, violence, or suspicious circumstances, noting that the deaths appeared to be consistent with natural medical emergencies occurring in individuals with known health risk factors and stressful lifestyles. The insurance industry investigated the pattern of deaths among organized crime figures, but found no evidence of fraud or suspicious circumstances, noting that the deaths were covered by legitimate life insurance policies and occurred in circumstances that were consistent with the stated causes of death. Lucky Luciano had created the perfect elimination system, a legitimate business that eliminated enemies while providing compassionate community services, generating substantial profits, and maintaining complete legal protection through its status as a trusted community institution. From his exile in Italy, Lucky had demonstrated that the ultimate criminal weapon was not violence, but the systematic corruption of society's most trusted institutions, turning them into instruments of death while maintaining their appearance as sources of comfort and support. The funeral home operations established Lucky as the most sophisticated criminal strategist in history, someone who could weaponize death itself while maintaining the appearance of providing dignified and compassionate services to grieving families. Eternal Peace Funeral Home continued operating as both a legitimate funeral business and a strategic elimination facility until Lucky's death in 1962, when control of the operation was transferred to his designated successors, who maintained the facility's dual purpose while expanding its services to include additional criminal activities. The funeral home's success established the template for criminal operations that exploited society's most trusted institutions, demonstrating that true criminal power came from the ability to corrupt legitimate businesses while maintaining their public reputation and community standing. Lucky Luciano had proven that the most effective criminal strategies were often the ones that appeared to serve the community while actually serving the criminal interests of those who controlled them from behind the facade of legitimate business operations. On the 12th of March, 1961, Vincent Rao entered a funeral home to arrange his mother's burial and instead became the victim of his own live burial, proving that in Lucky Luciano's world, the only certain thing about death was that it served Lucky's purposes rather than natural ones.